Going about the delay, I had something to attend to, uh, but no need to worry about that. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit tired. I don't know. I have not been getting much sleep lately, which is not a good thing. Do not be like me. All right, make sure that you get your 8 hours of sleep. Do not be like me at all, where you're tired of the goddamn time. uh, But yeah, today is a bit more chill day. We're just gonna be continuing. Well, I'm gonna be continuing reading Frankenstein. Probably gonna do another 4 chapters, so we'll get to chapter 8. Sounds good to me. But yeah, don't see much point in just kind of pussyfooting around. Yeah, might as well just continue on. All right then. Ow, my neck. All right. Sorry. I just got in my own head for a second. But yeah, let, let's continue. Right, so where do we leave off? Right, chapter 5. It was a sorry. Did not do many vocal warm-ups before this. It's all good. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning, the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yaw of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How could I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate this wretch whom, with such infinite pains and care, I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was a lustrous black and flowing, and his teeth of pearly whites, but these luxuries only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, almost of the same color of the dune-white sockets of which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and his straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and the breathless horrors and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself onto the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I had started from my sleep with horror. Oh God, I can't speak. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed when, by the dim and yellow of the moonlight, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes that may be called, were fixed on me. His jaw opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down with the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again endured with animation could not be so hideous as that wretch. I gazed upon him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of each artery. At others, I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long now, a space were now becoming a hell to me, and the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeples and its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued to the streets, pacing them with quick steps as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to my apartment which I inhabited, but felt inclined to hurry on, although drenched by the rain which poured from a black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the street without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with the irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one who, on a lowly road, doth in fear and dread, and, having once turned around, walks on, and turn no more in his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn at which the various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused. I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was the swift diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprang out. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed he, "how glad I am to see of you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my enlightening!" Nothing could equal my delight upon seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts of my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of my home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and, in a moment, forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may believe," said he, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that all necessary knowledge was not comprised in the noble art of bookkeeping, and, indeed, I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearying entreaties was the same as that of the Dutch schoolmaster in The Victor of Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek. I eat heartily without Greek. But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the grand of great knowledge. It gives me the greatest delight to see you, but tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well, and very happy, only a little uneasy with that they hear from you so seldom. But, by the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon the account of myself. But, my dear Frankenstein," continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, I did not I did not before remark how very ill you appear, so thin and pale. You look as if you had been watching for several nights. You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see, but I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end and I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less to allude to, the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I left in my apartment might still be there, alive and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared more still that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my own room. My hand was already on the lock of the door, before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shivering came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children were accustomed to doing when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side, but nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me. But when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clairville. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought my breakfast. But I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over the chairs and clapped my hands and laughed about. Clara at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy in his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eyes for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. My dear Victor, he cried, what for God's sake is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill are you? What is the cause of all this? Do not ask me, cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. He can tell! Oh, save me! Save me! I imagined the monster seized me. He struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval! What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless, and I did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth. He spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and firm in the hope that he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I bestowed existence was forever in my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject, persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. By very slow degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered, and I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. 'To my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by a fatal passion. "Dearest Clerval," exclaimed I, "how kind, how very good you are to me! This whole winter, instead of being spent in study, as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I had been the occasion, but you will forgive me. You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself. But get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not?" I trembled. One subject. What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dare not even think? "Compose yourself," said Clerval, who observed my change in color. "I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin will be very happy if they receive a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been and how easy at your long silence." "Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends whom I love and who are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here for some days for you now. It is from your cousin, I believe." End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. One second, let me get a little bit more water. Oh, bloody hell. There we go. Also, one second, sorry, I have to turn off my air conditioning. It's become quite cold, actually. There we go. Very cheap. Okay. Right then. Where were we? Okay, chapter 6. Clerval then put the following letter into my hands. It was from my very own Elizabeth. "My dearest cousin, you have been ill, very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. You are forbidden to write, to hold a pen, yet one word from you, dear Victor, is necessary to calm our apprehensions. For a long time I thought that each post would bring this line, and my my persuasions have restrained my uncle from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. I have prevented his encountering the inconveniences and perhaps danger of so long a journey. Yet how often I have regretted not being able to perform it myself. I figured to mention that the task of attending on your sickbed has devolved on some mercenary old nurse, who could never guess your wishes nor minister them with the care and affection of your poor cousin. Yet that is now over. Clerval writes that indeed you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting. Get well, and return to us. You will find a happy, cheerful home, and friends who love you dearly. Your father's health is vigorous, and he asks but to see you. He is but to be assured that you are well, and not a care will ever cloud his benevolent countenance. How pleased you would be to remark the improvement of our Ernest. He is now 16 and full of activity and spirit. He is desirous to be a true Swiss and to enter into foreign service, but we cannot part with him, at least until his elder brother returns to us. My uncle is not pleased with the idea of a military career in a distant country, but Ernest never had your powers of application. He looks upon study as an odious fetter. His time is spent in the open air, climbing the hills or rowing on the lake. I fear that he will become an idler unless we yield the point and permit him to enter on the profession which he has selected. Little alteration except the growth of our dear children has taken place since you left us. The blue lake, the blue lake and snow-clad mountains, they never change, and I think our place at home and our contented hearts are regulated by the same immutable laws. My trifling occupations take up my time and amuse me, and I am rewarded for any exertions by seeing none but happy, kind faces around me. Since you left us, one change has taken place in our little household. Do you remember on what occasion Justine Moritz extended our family? Probably you do not. I will relate her history, therefore, in a few words. Madame Moritz, her mother, was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. This girl has always been the favorite of her father, but through a strained perseverity, her mother could not endure her, and after the death of M. Moritz, treated her very ill. My aunt observed this, and when Justine was 12 years of age, sorry, I'm just chasing. Sorry, I lost my place. When Justine was 12 years of age, prevailed on her mother to allow her to live at our house. The republican institutions of our country have produced simpler and happier manners than those which prevail at the greatest monarchies that surround it. Hence there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants, and the lower orders being neither so poor nor so despised, their manners are more refined and moral. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which in our fortunate country does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of the dignity of a human being. Sorry, I lost my place again. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours, and I recollected that you once remarked that if you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it. For the same reason that Aristotle gives concerning the beauty of Angelica, she looked so frank-hearted and happy. My aunt conceived a great attachment for her, by which she was induced to give her an education superior to that which she had first intended. This benefit was fully repaid. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she made any professions. I never heard her one pass her lips, but you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her proactress. Although her disposition was gay and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence and endeavored to imitate her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. When my dearest aunt died, everyone was much too occupied in their own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her during her illness with the most anxious affection. Poor Justine, Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. One by one her brothers and sisters died, and her mother, with the exception of her neglected daughter, was left childless. The conscience of the woman was troubled. She began to think of the deaths of her favorites was a judgment from the heaven to chastise her partially. She was a Roman Catholic, and I believe her confessor confirmed the idea which she had conceived. Accordingly, a few months after your departure for Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her repentant mother. Poor girl. She wept when she quitted our house. She was much altered since the death of my aunt. Grief had given softness and a winning madness to her manners, which had before been remarkable for vivacity. Nor was her residence at her mother's house a nature to restore her gaiety. The poor woman was very I'm sorry. The poor woman was very vacillate, uh, was very facilitating, was very facilitating in her repentance. I'm sorry. There's a fair amount of language in the story I'm not familiar with. Apologies. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive her unkindness, but much oftener her accused her of having caused the deaths of her brother and sister. Perpetual fretting at length threw Madame Mortis into a decline, which which at first increased her irritability, but she is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather. In the beginning of this last winter, Justine has just returned to us. I assure you, I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle, and is extremely pretty. As I mentioned before, her mind and her expression continually remind me of my dear aunt. I must say also a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, with sweet, laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, two little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. He has already had one or two little wives, but Louisa Berrien is his favorite, a pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Now, dear Victor, I dare say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. The pretty Miss Mansfield has already received the congratulatory visits of her approaching marriage with the young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her ugly sister Manon married M. Dillivard, the rich banker, last autumn. Your favorite schoolfellow, Louis Manero, has suffered several misfortunes since the departure of Clerval from Geneva, but he has already recovered his spirits and is reported to be on the point of marrying a lively, pretty Frenchwoman, Madame Tavernier. She is a widow and much older than Manoir, but she is very much admired and a favorite with everyone. I have written myself into better spirits, dear cousin, but my anxiety returns upon me as I conclude. Write, dearest Victor. One line, one word will be a blessing to all of us. 10,000 thanks to Henry for his kindness, his affection, and his many letters. We are all sincerely very grateful. Adieu, my cousin. Take care of yourself, and I entreat you, write. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, March 18th, in the 18th century. Dear, dear Elizabeth, I exclaimed, when I had read her letter. I will write instantly, and relieve them from the anxiety they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me, but my convalescence had commenced, and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight I was able to leave my chamber. One of my first duties on my recovery was to introduce Clerval to the several professors at the university. In doing this, I underwent a kind of rough usage, ill befitting of the wounds in my mind had sustained. Ever since that fateful night, the end of my labors and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy, even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous system. Henry saw this and had removed all my apparatuses from my view. He had also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which I had previously been my liberal. He had also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which had previously been my laboratory. But these cares of Clerval were made of no avail when I visited the professors. M. Waldman inflicted torture when he praised the kindness and warmth and astonishing progress I had made in the sciences. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but, not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty and changed the subject from my improvement to the science itself. with the desire, as I evidently saw, of me drawing out. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if I had been carefully placed, one by one, in view of those instruments which were to be afterwards used in putting me to a slow, cruel death. I withered under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clerval, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging in excuse his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from my heart, but I did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised, but he never attempted to withdraw my secret from me, and though I loved him with a mixture of affection and reverence that knew no bounds, yet I could not persuade myself to confide in him the events which was so often presented to my recollection, but which I feared the details to another would only impress him more deeply. M. Kremp was not equally docile, and in my condition at the time of the most insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt incomments gave me even more pain than the benevolent approbation of M. Waldman. Damn the fellow, cried he. Why, M. Clerval, I assure you he has outstripped of us all. Aye, stare if you please, but nevertheless true. A youngster who, but a few years ago, believed in Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as in the gospel, has now set himself at the head of the university, as if he is soon not to be pulled down. We shall, we shall all be out of countenance, aye, continued he, observing my face expressive of suffering. M. Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be diffident of themselves. You know, M. Clerval, I myself when young, but that wears out in the very short time. M. Kremp had now commenced a eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from a subject that was so annoying to me. Clerval had never sympathized in my taste for natural science, and his literary pursuits differed wholly from those which had occupied me. He came to the university with the design of making himself a complete master of the Oriental languages, and thus he should open a field for the plan of life he had marked out for himself. Resolved to pursue no inglorious career, he turned his eyes towards the east, and affording scope for his spirit of enterprise, the Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit languages engaged his attention, and I was easily induced to enter on the same studies. Idleness had been ever irksome to me, and now I wished to fly from reflection, and hated my former studies. I felt great relief in being the fellow pupil with my friend, and found not only instruction but consultation in the works of the Orientalist. I did not, like him, attempt a critical knowledge of their dialects, for I did not contemplate making any other use of them than temporary amusement. I read merely to understand their meaning, and they well repaid my labors. Their melancholy is soothing, and their joy elevating, to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fires that consume your own heart. How different from the manly, heroic poetry of Greece and Rome. Summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the latter end of autumn. But being delayed by several accidents, winter and snow arrived, the roads were deeply impassable, and my journey was retarded until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay very bitterly, for I longed to see my native town and my beloved friends. My return had only been delayed for so long, and from an unwillingness to leave Clerval in a strange place before he had become acquainted with any of its inhabitants. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was uncommonly late, when it came, its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected a letter daily which was to fix the date of my departure, when Henry proposed a pedestrian tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. I acceded with pleasure to this proposition. I was fond of the exercise, and Clerval had always been my favorite companion in the ramble of this nature that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. We passed a fortnight in these in these preambulations, my health and spirits had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the salubrious air, from the salubrious air I breathed. Again, I apologize greatly for my terrible pronunciation. I am very sorry. The natural instance of our progress and the conversation of my friend. Study had secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial. But Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspects of nature, and the cheerful faces of children. Excellent friend, how sincerely did you love me, and endeavor to elevate my mind until it was on the level of your own. A selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loved and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. When happy inanimate nature had the power of bestowed on me the most delightful sensations, a serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed in the hedges, while those of summer were already in bud. I was undisturbed by thoughts which during the preceding year had pressed upon me, notwithstanding my endeavors to throw them off with an inconceivable burden. Henry rejoiced in my gaiety, and sincerely sympathized in my feelings. He exerted himself to amuse me, while he expressed the sensations that filled his soul. The resources of his mind on this occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and, very often, in imitation of the Persian Arabic writers, he invented tales of wonderful fancy passion. At other times, he repeated my favorite poems, or drew me on to arguments, which he supported with the greatest ingenuity. We returned to our college on a Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. End of chapter 6. Okay, 1 second, please. Okay. Sorry, it feels like there's something on my eyebrow. I feel like a sharp pain there. I don't know why. 1 second, 1 second, please. Okay. Sorry, I got distracted by something. Right, let us continue. Let us continue. Chapter 7. On my return, I found the following letter from my father. My dear Victor, you have probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix the date of your return to us, and I was at first very tempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I should expect you. But that would be a cruel kindness, and I dare not do it. What would your what would be your surprise, my son, when you expected a happy and glad welcome to behold, on the contrary, tears and wretchedness? And how, Victor, can I relate our misfortune? Absence cannot have rendered you powerless to our joys and griefs. And how shall I inflict pain on my long absent son? I wish to prepare you for the woeful news, but I know it is impossible. Even now your eye skims over the page to seek the words which are to convey you the horrible tidings. William is dead. That sweet child whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, who was so gentle yet so gay, Victor, he is murdered. I will not attempt to console you, but simply relate the circumstances of the transaction. Last Thursday, on May the 7th, I, my niece, and your two brothers went to a walk in Plain Palace. The evening was warm and serene, and we prolonged in our walk farther than usual. It was already dusk before we thought of returning, and then we discovered that William and Ernest, who had gone on before, were not to be found. We accordingly rested on a seat until they should return. Presently, Ernest came and inquired if we had seen his brother. He said that he had been playing with him, that William had run away to hide himself, and that he vanished and that he vainly sought for him, and afterwards waiting for a long time, but that he did not return. This account rather alarmed us, and we continued to search for him until night fell. When Elizabeth conjured that he might have returned to the house, he was not there. We returned again with torches, for I could not rest, when I thought that my sweet boy had lost himself and was exposed to all the damps and dews of night. Elizabeth also suffered extreme anguish. About 5 in the morning, I discovered my lovely boy, whom the night before I had seen blooming and active in health, stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The prints of the murderer's fingers were on his neck. He was conveyed home, and the anguish that was visible in my countenance betrayed the secret to Elizabeth. She was very earnest to see the corpse. At first I attempted to prevent her, but she persisted, and entering the room where it lay, hastily examined the neck of the victim, and clasping her hands, exclaimed, "Oh, God! I have murdered my darling child!" She fainted, and was restored with extreme difficulty. When she again lived, it was only to weep and sigh. She told me that same evening William had teased her to let him wear a very valuable miniature that she possessed of your mother. This picture is gone, and was doubtless the temptation which urged the murderer to do the deed. We have no trace of him at present, although our exertions to discover him are unremitted, but they will not restore my beloved William. Come, dearest Victor, you alone can console Elizabeth. She weeps continuously, and accuses herself unjustly as the cause of his death. Her words pierce my heart. We are all unhappy, but will that not be an additional motive for you, my son, to return and be our comforter? Your dear mother. Alas, Victor, I now say, thank God she did not live to witness this cruel, miserable death of her youngest darling. Come, Victor, not brooding through thoughts of vengeance against the assassin, but with feelings of peace and gentleness, that will heal, instead of festering, the wounds of our minds. Enter the house of mourning, my friend, but with kindness and affection for those who love you, and not with hatred for your enemies. Your affectionate and afflicted father, Alphonse Frankenstein. Geneva, May 12th, 18th century. Clerval, who had watched my countenance as I read this letter, was surprised to observe the despair that succeeded the joy I had first expressed on receiving the news from my friends. I threw the letter on the table and covered my face with my hands. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed Henry, when he perceived me weep with bitterness, "are you always to be unhappy? My dear friend, what has happened?" I motioned him to take the letter, and while I walked up and down the room in the extremest agitation, tears also gushed from the eyes of Clerval as he read the account of my misfortune. "I can offer you no consultation, my friend," said he. "Your disaster is irreparable. What do you intend to do?" "To go instantly to Geneva. Come with me, Henry, to order the horses." During our walk, Clerval endeavored to say a few words of consultation. He could only express his heartfelt sympathy. "Poor William," he said. "Dear, lovely child. He now sleeps with his angel mother, who that had seen him bright and joyous in his young beauty must weep over his untimely loss. To die so miserably, to feel the murderer's grasp, how much more a murder that could destroy radiant innocence. Poor little fellow. One only consultation we have. His friends mourn and weep, but he is at rest. The pang is over. His sufferings are at an end forever. A sod covers his gentle form, and he knows no pain. He can no longer be a subject for pity. We must reserve that for his miserable survivors. Corvo spoke thus as we hurried through the streets. The words impressed themselves on my mind, and I remembered them afterwards in solitude. But now, as soon as the horses arrived, I hurried into the cabriolet and bade farewell to my friend. My journey was very melancholic. At first I wished to hurry on, for I longed to console and sympathize with my loving and sorrowing friends. But when I drew near my native town, I slacked my progress. I could hardly sustain the multitude of feelings that crowded my mind. I passed through scenes familiar to my youth, but which I had not seen for nearly 6 years at this point. How altered everything might be during that time. One sudden and desolating change had taken place, but a thousand little circumstances might have by degrees worked other alterations, which, although they were done more tranquilly, might not be any less decisive. Fear overcame me. I dared no advance, dreading a thousand nameless evils that made me tremble. Although I was unable to define them, I remained 2 days at Lausanne in a painful state of mind. I contemplated the lake. The waters were placid, and all around was calm in the snowy mountains. The palaces of nature were not changed. By degrees of calm and heavenly scene restored to me, I continued my journey to Geneva. The road ran by the side of the lake, which was narrow as I approached my native town. I discovered more distinctly the black sides of the Jura, the bright summit of Mont Blanc. I wept like a child. Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear, the lake and sky are blue and placid. Is this to prognosticate peace, or to mock at my unhappiness? I fear, my friend, that I shall render myself tedious by dwelling on these preliminary circumstances, but they were days of comparative happiness, and I think of them with pleasure. My country, my beloved country, who but a native can tell the delight I took in again in beholding thy streams, thy mountains, and, more than all, thy lovely lake? Yet, as I drew nearer home, grief and fear overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly seek a dark mountain, I felt still more gloomily. The pictures appeared a vast and dim scene of evil, and I foresaw obscurely that I was destined to become the most wretched of human beings. Alas, I prophesied truly, and failed only in one single circumstance, that, in all the misery I imagined and dreaded, I did not conceive the 100th part of the anguish I was destined to endure. It was completely dark when I arrived in the environs of Geneva. The gates of the town were already shut, and I was obliged to pass the night at Secheron, a village at distance of half a league from the city. The sky was serene, and as I was unable to rest, I resolved to visit the spot where my poor William had been murdered. As I could not pass through the town, I was obliged to cross the lake in a boat to arrive at the plain places. During this short voyage, I saw the lighting playing on the summit of Mont Blanc in the most beautiful figures. The storms appeared to approach rapidly, and, on landing, I ascended to a low hill that I might observe its progress. It advanced, the heavens were clouded, and I soon felt the rain coming slowly in large drops, but its violence quickly increased. I quitted my seat and walked on. Although the darkness and storm increased every minute, the thunder burst with a terrific crash over my head. It was echoed from the cell of the Juris and the office of Savory. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled my eyes, illuminating the lake, making it appear like a vast sheet of fire. Then for every instant, everything seemed of a pitchy darkness, until the eye recovered itself from the preceding flash. The storm, as is often the case in Switzerland, appeared at once in various parts of the heavens. The most violent storm hung exactly north of the town, over the part of the lake which lies between the promenade, I can't fucking speak today, promontory of Belrive and the village of Copet. Another storm enlightened Jura with faint flashes, and another darkened, sometimes disclosed the mole, a peaked mountain to the east of the lake. While I watched the tempest, so beautiful and yet terrific, I wandered on with a hasty step. The noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and screamed aloud, "William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge." As I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object, and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy daemon to which I had given life. What what did he there? Could he be, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother? No sooner did the idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth, that my teeth chattered, and I was forced to lean against the tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in human shape could have destroyed the fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. The mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain, for another flash discovered him to me hanging among the rocks of a near perpendicular ascent of Mount Silive, a hill that bounds the land palace of the south. He soon reached the summit and disappeared. I remained motionless. The thunder ceased, but the rain still continued, and the scene was enveloped in impenetrable darkness. I resolved in my mind the events which I had until now sought to forget, the whole train of my progress towards the creation, the appearance of the work of my own hands at my bedside, its departure. 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night of which he had first received life. And was this his first crime? Alas, I had turned loose into the world a depraved wretch, whose delight was in carnage and misery. Had he not murdered my brother? No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night, which I spent cold and wet in the open air. But I did not feel the inconvenience of the weather. My imagination was busy in the scenes of evil and despair. I considered the being whom I cast among mankind and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of honor, such as the deed which he had now done, nearly the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave. I forced to destroy all that was dear to me. Day dawned, and I directed my steps towards the town. The gates were opened, and I hastened to my father's house. My first thoughts was to discover what I knew of the murderer, and cause instant pursuit to be made. But I paused and I reflected on the story I had to tell. A being whom I myself formed and endured with life had met me at midnight among the precipices of an inaccessible mountain. I remembered also the nervous fever with which I had been seized just at the time I dated my creation, and which would have given the air of delirium to a tale otherwise so utterly improbable. I knew if I had any other I well knew if any other had communicated such a relation to me, I should have looked upon it as if it was the ravings of insanity. Besides, the strange nature of the animal would elude all pursuit. even if I were so far credited as to persuade my relatives to commence it. And then of what use would be to pursue? What could arrest a creature capable of scaling the overhead sides of Mount Saleve? These reflections determined me, and I resolved to remain silent. It was about 5 in the morning when I entered my father's house, and I told the servants not to disturb the family and went into the library to attend the usual hour of rising. 6 years had elapsed, passed in a dream, but for one indelible trace, I stood in the same place where I had last embraced my father before my departure for Ingolstadt. Beloved and venerable parent, he still remained to me. I gazed on the picture of my mother, which stood over the mantelpiece. It was a historical subject, painted at my father's desire, and represented Caroline Baleford in the agony of despair. Kneeling by the coffin of her dead father, her garb was rustic and her cheek pale, but there was an air of dignity and beauty that hardly permitted the sentiments of pity. Below this picture was a miniature of William, and my tears flowed when I looked upon it. While I was thus engaged, Ernest entered. He had heard me arrive, and hastened to welcome me. "Welcome, my dearest Victor," he said. "Ah, I wish you had come 3 months ago. Then you would have found us all joyous and delighted. You come to us now to share a misery which nothing can alleviate. Yet your presence will, I hope, revive our father, who seems sinking under his misfortune. Then your persuasions will induce poor Elizabeth to cease her vain and tormenting self-accusations. Poor William! He was our darling and our pride." Tears, unrestrained, fell from my brother's eyes. A sense of mortal agony crept over my frame, but before I had only imagined the wretchedness of my desolated home, the reality came on to me as a new, and not less terrible disaster. I tried to calm Ernest. I inquired more minutely concerning my father, and here I named my cousin. "She, most of all," said Ernest, "requires consultation. She accused herself of having caused the death of my brother, and that made her very wretched. But since the murderer has been discovered—" "The murderer discovered? Good God, how could that be? Who could have attempted to pursue him? It is impossible. One might as well try to overtake the winds, or confine a mountain stream with a straw. I saw him too. He was free last night." "I do not know what you mean," replied my brother, in accents of wonder. "But to us this discovery we have made completes our misery. No one believes it at first, and even now Elizabeth will not be convinced, notwithstanding all evidence. Indeed, who would credit that Justine Moritz, who was so amiable and fond of all the family, could suddenly be so capable of so frightful, so appalling a crime?" "Justine Moritz? Poor, poor girl! Is she the accused? But it is wrongfully. Everyone knows that. No one believes it. Surely, Ernest." "No one did at first, but several circumstances came out that have almost forced conviction upon us, and her own behavior has been so confused as to aid to the evidence of facts to facts that weighed at. I fear leaves no hope for doubt. But she will be tried today, and you will hear them all." He then related the morning of which the poor murder of William had been discovered. Justine had been taken ill, confined to her bed for several days. During this interval, one of the servants, happening to examine the apparel she had worn on the night of the murder, had discovered in her pocket the picture of my mother, which had been judged from the temptation of the murderer. The servant instantly showed it to one of the others, who, without saying a word to any of the family, went on a magistrate, and, upon their disposition, Justine was apprehended. On being charged with the fact, the poor girl confirmed the suspicion in a great measure by her extreme confusion in the matter. This was a strange tale, but it did not shake my faith, and I replied earnestly, "You are all mistaken. I know the murderer. Justine, poor, good Justine, is innocent." At this instant my father entered. I saw unhappiness deeply impressed on his countenance, but he endeavored to welcome me cheerfully, and after we had all exchanged our mournful greeting, would have introduced some other topic than that of our disaster, had not Ernest exclaimed, "Good God, Papa! Victor says he knows who was the murderer of poor William." "We all do, unfortunately," replied my father, "for, indeed, I have been forever ignorant to have discovered so much depravity and ingratitude in one I valued so highly." "My dear father, you are mistaken. Justine is innocent." "If she is, God forbid she should suffer as guilty. She is to be tried today, and I hope, I sincerely hope, that she will be acquitted." This speech calmly. I was firmly convinced in my own mind that Justine, indeed every human being, was guiltless of this murder. I had no fear, therefore, that any circumstantial evidence could be brought forward strong enough to convict her. My tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. Did did anyone indeed exist except I, the creator, who would believe, unless his senses convinced him, in the existence of the living monument of presumption and rash ignorance which I had let loose upon the world? We were soon joined by Elizabeth. Time had altered her since I last beheld her. It had endowed her with loveliness surpassing the beauty of her childish years. There was the same candor, the same vivacity, but it was allied to an expression more full of uh, more full of sensibility and intellect. She welcomed me with the greatest affection. "Your arrival, my dear cousin," said she, "fills me with hope. You perhaps will find some means to justify my poor, guiltless Justine. Alas, who is safe if she is to be convicted of her crime? I rely on her innocence as certainly as I do upon my own. Our misfortune is doubtless hard to us all. We have not only lost that loving, darling boy, but this poor girl, whom I sincerely love, is to be torn away by even worse fate. If she is condemned, I shall never know joy more. But she will not. I am sure she will not. Then I shall be happy again, even after the sad death of my late William." "She is innocent, my Elizabeth," said I, "and that shall be proved. Fear nothing, but let your spirits be cheered by the assurance of her acquittal. How kind and generous you are! Everyone else believes in her guilt, and that made me wretched, for I knew it was impossible, and to see everyone else prejudiced in so deadly a manner rendered hopeless and despairing," she wrote. "Dearest niece," said my father, "dry your tears. If she is, as you believe, innocent, rely on the justice of our laws, and the activity which I shall prevent the slightest shadow of partiality." Right. End of chapter 7. Oh god, what happened to my head for a second? Right. Sorry, I just had to stretch there for a second. Sorry, I'm just caught up in some of my own thoughts right now. I just wanted to think what I should do for dinner tonight. Not quite sure. I don't have a lot of groceries. I actually need to go on a grocery run, so I'm just thinking what I should do. I'll figure it out. I will figure it out. Need not worry. Right. Chapter 8. We passed a few sad hours until 11 o'clock, when the trial was to commence. My father and the rest of the family began obliged to attend as witnesses. I accompanied them to the court. During the whole of this wretched mockery of justice, I suffered living torture. It was to be decided whether the result of my curiosity and law devices would cause the death of two of my fellow beings, one of a smiling babe full of innocence and joy, the other far more dreadfully murdered, with every aggravation of infamy that could make the murder memorable in horror. Justine was also a girl of merit, and possessed qualities which promised to render her life happy. Now all was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave, and I the cause. 1,000 times rather would have I confessed myself guilty of a crime to ascribe to Justine, but I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered as the ravings of a madman, and would not have exulted her who suffered through me. The appearance of Justine was calm. She was dressed in mourning, and her countenance, always engaging, was rendered by the solemnity of her feelings exquisitely beautiful, yet she appeared confident in innocence and did not tremble. Although gazed on and exerted by thousands, for all the kindness which her beauty might otherwise have excited was obliterated in the minds of the spectators by the imagination of the enormity she was supposed to have committed. She was tranquil, yet her tranquillity was evidently constrained, as her confusion had been before abducted as proof of her guilt. She worked up her mind to an appearance of courage. When she entered the court, she threw her eyes round it. She threw her eyes round it and quickly discovered where we were seated. A tear seemed to dim her eye when she saw us, but she quickly recovered herself, and a look of sorrowful affection seemed to attest her utter guiltlessness. The trial begun, and after the advocate against her had stated the charge, several witnesses were called. Several strange facts combined against her, which might have staggered anyone who had not such proof of her innocence as had I. She had been out the whole night on which the murder had committed, and towards the morning had been perceived by a market woman not far from the spot where the body of the murdered child had been afterward found. The woman asked what she did there, and she looked very strangely and only returned a confused and unintelligible answer. She returned to the house about 8 o'clock, and when inquired where she had passed the night, she replied that she had been looking for the child, and demanded earnestly if anything had been heard concerning him. When shown the body, she fell into violent hysterics and kept in her bed for several days. The picture was then produced which the servant had found in her pocket, when Elizabeth, in a faltering voice, proved that it was the same which, an hour before, the child had been missed. She had placed round his neck. A murmur of horror and indignation filled the court. Justine called out for her defense. As the child had proceeded, her countenance had altered. Surprise, horror, and misery were strongly expressed. Sometimes she struggled with her tears, but when she was desired to plead, she collected her powers and spoke in an audible, although variable voice. God knows, she said, how entirely I am innocent, but I do not pretend that my protestations should acquit me. I rest my innocence on a plain and simple explanation of the facts which had been adduced against me. I hope the character I have always been born will incline my judges to a favorable interpretation where any circumstances appear doubtful or suspicious. She then related, on the permission of Elizabeth, she had passed that evening of the night on which the murder had been committed at the house of the aunt of Sheen, a village situated about a league from Geneva. On her return, about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked if she had seen anything of the child who was lost. She was alarmed by this account, and passed several hours in looking for him. When the gates of Geneva were shut, she was forced to remain several hours of the night in a barn belonging to a cottage, being unwillingly to call up the inhabitants to whom she was well known. Most of the night she spent here watching. Towards the morning she believed that she had slept a few minutes. Some steps disturbed her, and she awoke. It was dawn, and she quitted her asylum, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. If she had gone near the spot where his body lay, it was without her knowledge. She had been bewildered by the question of by the market woman was not surprising, since she had passed a sleepless night, and the fate of poor Williams was yet uncertain. Concerning the pictures she could give no account. I know, continued the unhappy victim, how heavily and fatally this one circumstance weighs against me, but I have no power of explaining it. And when I have expressed my utter ignorance, I am only left with conjecture concerning the probabilities by which it might have been placed in my pocket. But here also I am checked. I believe that I have no enemy on earth, and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the murderer place it there? I know of no opportunity afforded him for so doing, or, if I had, why should I have stolen the jewel to part with it again so soon? I commit my cause to the justice of my judges, yet I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examine concerning my character, and if their testimony shall not overweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned, although I would plead my salvation on my innocence. Several witnesses were called who had known her for many years, and they spoke well of her, but fear and hatred of the crime of which they supposed her guilty rendered them timorous and unwilling to come forward. Elizabeth saw even this last resource, her excellent dispositions and irreproachable conduct, about to fail the accused when, although violently agitated, she desired permission to address the court. I am, she said, the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered, or rather his sister, for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since, and even long before his birth. I may therefore be judged indecent in me to come forward on this occasion, but when I see fellow creature about to perish, through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character. I am well acquainted with the accused. I have lived in the same house with her, at one time for 5 and another for nearly 2 years. During all that period, she appeared to be the most amiable and benevolent of human creatures. She nursed Madame Frankenstein, my aunt, in her last illness, and with greatest affection and care, and afterwards attended her own mother during a tedious illness, in a manner that excited the admiration of all who knew her. After which she again lived in my uncle's house, where she was beloved by all the family. She was warmly attached to the child who is now dead, and acted towards him like the most affectionate mother. For my own part, I do not hesitate to say that, notwithstanding all evidence produced against her, I believe and rely on her perfect innocence. She had no temptation for such action as to the valuable honor on which the chief proof rests. If she had earnestly desired it, I should have willingly given it to her. So much I do esteem and value her. A murmur of approbation followed Elizabeth's simple and powerful appeal, but it was excited by her generous interference, and not in favor of poor Justine, on whom the public indignation was turned with renewed violence, charging her with the blackest ingratitude. She herself wept as Elizabeth spoke, but she did not answer. My own agitation and anguish were extreme during the whole trial. I believed in her innocence. I knew it. Could the Damon who had, I did not for a minute doubt, murdered my brother, also in his hellish sport, have betrayed the innocents to death and ignominy? I could not sustain the horror of my situation, and when I perceived that the popular voice and countenances of the judges had already condemned my unhappy victim, I rushed out the court in agony. The tortures of the accused did not equal my mind. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. I passed a night of unmingled wretchedness. In the morning I went to the court. My lips and throats were parched. I dare not ask the fatal question, but I had known, and the officer guessed the cause of my visit. The ballots had been thrown. They were all black, and Justine was condemned. I cannot pretend to describe what I then felt. I had before experienced sensations of horror, and I had endeavored to bestow upon them adequate expressions. But words cannot convey an idea of the heart-sickening despair I had just endured. The person to whom I addressed myself added that Justine had already confessed her guilt. That evidence, he observed, was hardly required in so glaring a case, but I am glad of it, and, indeed, none of our judges would like to condemn a criminal upon circumstantial evidence, be it ever so desired. This was strange and unexpected intelligence. What could it mean? Had my eyes deceived me? And was I really as mad as the whole world would believe me to be if I disclosed the object of my suspicions? I hastened my return home, and Elizabeth eagerly demanded the result. My cousin, replied I, it is decided as many of you have expected. All the judges had rather that 10 innocent should suffer than that one guilty should escape. But she has confessed. This was a dire blow to poor Elizabeth, who had relied with firmness upon Justine's innocence. "Alas," she said, "how shall I ever believe in human goodness? Justine, who I loved and esteemed as my sister, how, how could she put on those smiles of innocence only to betray? Her mild eyes seemed incapable of any severity or guile, yet she has committed a murder." Soon after, we heard that the poor victim had expressed a desire to see my cousin. My father wished her not to go, but she said that he left it to her own judgment and feelings to decide. "Yes," said Elizabeth, "I will go, although she is guilty, and you, Victor, shall accompany me. I cannot go alone." The idea of this visit was torture to me, yet I could not refuse. We entered the gloomy prison chamber, and beheld Justine sitting on some straw, and at the farther end, her hands were manacled, her head rested on her knees. She rose on seeing us enter, and we were left alone with her. She threw herself at the feet of Elizabeth, weeping bitterly. My cousin wept also. "Oh, Justine," she said, "why did you rob me of my last consultation? I relied on your innocence, and although I was then very wretched, I was not so miserable as I am now. And do you also believe that I am so very, very wicked? Do you also join with my enemies to crush me, to condemn me as a murderer?" Her voice was suffocated with sobs. "Rise, my poor girl," said Elizabeth. "Why do you kneel, if you are innocent? I am not one of your enemies. I believe you guiltless, notwithstanding every evidence, until I heard you had yourself declared your guilt. That report, you say, is false, and be assured, dear Justine, that nothing can shake my confidence in you for a moment, but your own confession." I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed that I might obtain absolution, but now the falsehood lies heavier in my heart than all other sins. The God of heaven forgive me. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor had besieged me. He threatened me, he menaced, until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. He threatened excommunication and hellfire in my last moments if I continued obdurate. My dear lady, I had none to support me. All looked to me as a wretch doomed to ignominy and purgation. What could I do? In an evil hour I subscribed to a lie, and now only I am truly miserable." She paused, weeping, and then continued, "I thought with horror, my sweet lady, that you should believe your Justine, whom you are blessed on so highly honored, and whom you loved, was a creature capable of crime which none but the devil himself could have perpetrated. Dear William, dearest blessed child, I soon shall see you again in heaven, where we shall all be happy, and that consoles me, going as I am to suffer ignominy and death. Oh, Justine, forgive me for having one moment disturbed you. Why did you confess? But do not mourn, dear girl. Do not fear. I will proclaim, I will prove your innocence, and I will melt the stony heart of your enemies by my tears and prayers. You shall not die, you, my playfellow, my companion, my sister, perish on the scaffold. No, no, I could never survive so horrible a misfortune." Justine shook her head mournfully. "I do not fear to die," she said. "That pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. I shall leave a sad and bitter world, and if you remember me and think of me of one unjustly condemned, I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Learn from me, dear lady, to submit in patience to the will of heaven." During this conversation, I had to retire to a corner of the prison room, where I could conceal the horrid anguish that possessed me. Despair! Who dared talk of that? The poor victim who on the morrow was to pass the awful boundary between life and death, and felt not, as I did, such deep and bitter agony. I gnashed my teeth and ground them together, uttering a groan that came from my inmost soul. Justine stared. When she saw who it was, she approached me and said, "Dear sir, you are very kind to visit me. You, I hope, do not believe I am guilty." I could not answer. "No, Justine," said Elizabeth. "He is more convinced of your innocence than I was, for, even when he heard that you had confessed, he did not credit it. I truly thank him. In these last moments, I feel the sincerest gratitude towards those who think of me with kindness. How sweet is the affection of those oh sorry, how sweet is the affection of others to such a wretch as I am. It removes more than half my misfortune, and I feel as if I could die in peace now that my innocence is acknowledged by you, dear lady, and your cousin." Thus the poor sufferer tried to comfort others and herself. She indeed gained the resignation she desired, but I, the true murderer, felt the never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed of no hope nor consultation. Elizabeth also wept and was unhappy, but hers was also the misery of innocence, which, like a cloud that passes over the fair moon, for a while hides but cannot tarnish its brightness. Anguish and despair had penetrated into the core of my heart. I bore a hell within me which nothing could extinguish. We stayed several hours with Justine, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth could tear herself away. "I wish," cried she, "that I were to die with you. I cannot live in this world of misery." Justine assumed an air of cheerfulness, while she with difficulty repressed her bitter tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said in a deep voice of half-suppressed emotion, "Farewell, sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved and only friend. May heaven in its bounty bless and preserve you. May this be the last misfortune that you will ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so." And on the morrow Justine died. Her heart rendering eloquence failed to move the judges from their settled conviction in the criminality of the saintly sufferer. My passionate and indignant appeals were also lost upon them, and I received the cold answers and heard the harsh, unfeeling reasoning of these men. My purposely avowed died away on my lips. Thus I might proclaim myself a madman, but do not revoke the sentence passed upon my wretched victim. She perished on the scaffold as a murderess. From the tortures of my own heart, I turned to contemplate the deep and voiceless grief of my Elizabeth. This was also my doing, and my father's woe, the desolation of that so smiling home, all was the work of my thrice accursed hands. Ye weep, unhappy ones, but these are not your last tears. Again shall you raise the funeral wail, and the sound of your lamentation shall again and again be heard. Frankenstein, your son, your kinsman, your early, much beloved friend, he who would spend each vital drop of blood for your sakes, who has no thought nor sense of joy, except as it is mirrored also in your dearest countenances, who would fill the air with blessings, and spend his life in serving you. He bids you weep, to shed countless tears, happy beyond his hopes. If thus inexorable fate be satisfied, and if the destruction pause before the peace of the grave have succeeded your sad torments. Thus spoke my prophetic soul, as, torn by remorse, horror, and despair, I beheld those I loved spend vain sorrow upon the graves of William and Justine, the first hapless victims to my unhallowed arts. End of chapter 8. Right. Sorry, I'm just stretching. So that was 4 more chapters of Frankenstein. Those were more sorrowful chapters, showing the birth of Frankenstein's creature and the sorrows which it has brought upon him. Quite unfortunate, but we're about to, further on in the book, show the true horrors that Victor Frankenstein has brought upon himself. But I'm afraid that was just where I shall leave you for today. But yes, I hope you all have a pleasant evening, and I shall return to you on the morrow. We'll be continuing my gameplay of Hi-Fi Rush, and I'm contemplating what else I may want to do. I have my time set for 5 p.m., but there's a possibility I may be online before then. I'm not sure. But either way, that is for Val of tomorrow to decide. And anyways, I hope you all have a damn good one, and I shall see you next time. Until then, my friends, rest well and rest easy. Have a damn good one, y'all. Chalka.